Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World, a very special edition ahead of the return of our usual weekly show on Friday the 17th of this month. But now, today, I went to the personal office of the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, now of course also many other titles, including the official envoy of the Quartet to the Middle East. In his autobiography, out right now, he is by turns outspoken, provocative, unrepentant, often serious, sometimes funny. He also declares, quote, that I have always been more interested in religion than in politics. Fair enough, we started there. Mr. Blair, Tony, Stephen Hawking comes out and says, God doesn't have to exist, God doesn't exist, we can have creation, we no longer need God as our hypothesis. Do things like that ever make you think twice about faith, your faith?
Not really. I mean, I think there's a perfectly well-established atheist position, which is fair enough, and you know, it's a free world. People can think what they think. But my religious faith has probably got stronger over the years, not weaker. I think myself that the issue to do with religion and religious faith, which is why I founded my Religious Interfaith Foundation, is possibly the single most important issue actually of the 21st century. Probably more important today than political ideology, though in the 20th century that was very much dominated by political ideology.
Politics and religion, actually, one occurs to one to think immediately of New York, obviously, where there's this bitter, big row at the moment over whether just close to Ground Zero there should be a mosque, a Muslim mosque, and it's caused a massive, I mean, some of the acres of quotes that have been for instance, people have said that on the one hand that you wouldn't put up a memorial to Hitler in Washington, you wouldn't, and so on and so forth. Where do you stand on that issue? Should that mosque be built near Ground Zero or not?
Well, it's not really an issue for me, but I think, you know, the normal rules should apply, and I think that's what President Obama's saying and Mayor Bloomberg's saying. And let's be absolutely clear, the people who committed the atrocity of 9/11 do not represent the majority of Muslims. I mean, Islam is in fact a peaceful and decent religion, a progressive religion actually. And so those people who use it for reactionary purposes are no more representatives of Islam than Christians who commit killing in the name of Christianity are proper representatives of the Christian faith.
So you hope it goes up, that mosque?
Well, I think it's up for the proper rules for New York and New Yorkers to decide that. But I don't think that there should be discrimination against people because they're Muslims. And you know, when I was running this country here, we introduced for the first time the right of Muslims to have their schools here, in the same way that Jews and Christians can. I actually had the first Muslims in my cabinet, in my government rather, and in the House of Lords. And you know, I believe in equality, irrespective of someone's religious faith. And I think one of the important things in today's world is to create circumstances in which people of different faiths not just tolerate each other, but respect each other and recognize that there are different paths to salvation.
When's the last time you spoke to Gordon Brown?
I spoke to him a few weeks back, but you know, we're in contact, and I should imagine we will remain in contact.
Do you think that the friendship that there once was will ever return?
I hope so, actually.
Before the years in government?
I hope so. Look, it's very difficult, this, because if you're going to write an account of the 10 years in government, if you don't write about the relationship between myself and Gordon, it's a slightly odd autobiography, frankly, of your time as Prime Minister. I tried to be balanced in it. You know, I was open about the fact that we had, towards the end particularly, fundamental differences and difficulties, but I also paid tribute to the enormous contribution he made and to his strengths, which are considerable and were used to the benefit of the country. But you know, you can't, if you're going to write any type of account of the 10 years and be at all honest about it, you can't say there weren't problems, because there were, obviously.
There were, inevitably in that case. Are you glad, looking back, that we didn't join the euro?
No, I think on balance the economics weren't right. The politics in my view, were always overwhelming. And in my view, Britain should be a key major player in the European Union, and Euroscepticism today is just a kind of post-imperial delusion that is completely absurd when we look at how the world is developing, power shifting east, the emergence of China and India and then Brazil and all these countries. A country like Britain's got to be a key player in the European Union. However, as I always used to say to people about the single currency, which is why, contrary to what people sometimes think, I never actually advocated joining it, it's an economic and monetary union.
You didn't? That's
no, I didn't. I mean, I was... if the economics had been right, I would have been absolutely up for the politics, because I thought the politics of joining were always very strong. But as I used to say to people, it's called economic and monetary union because it's an economic union. So if the economics don't work or aren't right, then it's not sensible to do.
You'd have to say at the moment, what everybody's saying, that the euro could be doomed.
Yes, I don't believe it will be, frankly. And I think that just as at the moment, you know, the Eurozone is under tremendous pressure, so we shouldn't ignore the enormous benefits that a single currency will bring to what is the largest commercial market in the world. And what I keep saying to people about Europe, the real test for Europe now is, can Europe rise to the challenge in terms of its economy, defense policy, energy policy, issues like illegal immigration? Europe, if it's smart, can make itself a huge world power. But let's be absolutely clear, in today's world, countries even the size of Britain and France and Germany and Italy and Spain and so on, we're not big enough to be able to do without the collective strength that comes from the European Union.
As we move on, one piece of advice we seek. What is the advice you would give to David Cameron on the problems and joys of bringing up a baby and a small child in 10 Downing Street?
Well, I wouldn't normally give advice to him at all, since, you know, he's perfectly entitled to do his own job as British Prime Minister. But in this respect, I actually found it with Leo in Downing Street was a tremendous joy, in fact, because it's a sort of little bit of normality, and in it.
Oh, you once told me that he thawed for you the president of Kazakhstan or somewhere like that.
Well, he used to. The great thing about a baby is it's a fantastic talking point with any of the other leaders. And I always remember actually when we took Leo to New York in the year 2000, when he was just a couple of months old, really. And I remember he actually came into the P5 meeting of the UN Security Council at the end of it to say hello to the leaders there. And there's a wonderful picture, actually, I think I've still got somewhere, of Bill Clinton and Jacques Chirac with him. So he's a lucky boy. But David Cameron will find it a great, you know, Downing Street is a strange place to have young kids in a way, but the staff there are fantastic and will give the baby a lot of love and affection.
Well, I'm sure he can act on those words. Turning for a moment to the subject of, the inevitable subject of Iraq, do you feel that, first and foremost, you will always be linked, first and foremost, with Iraq?
It'll always be a big part of the story of my premiership, and obviously here in 10 years of domestic change, there were a lot of other things that went on. You've got the peace process in Northern Ireland and trebling of aid to Africa and all these things, but I have no problem with that either, incidentally. And we'll have to wait and see how it turns out eventually. But I think we've got a long, long way to go in respect of what I think is the underlying issue, which is really how we deal with this extremism in the world today, how we counter it. And therefore, I think that the judgments in this will be made over a long period of time, not just in a few years.
Well, this is one of the reasons why, on the thing we mentioned earlier about Ground Zero and so on and so forth, Frank Rich in the New York Times said, how on earth can we hope to make waves and achieve something in Kandahar if everyone is throwing the worst words in the book at the Muslims in New York?
Yeah, and I kind of understand that. And I think one of the things, look, one of the reasons why I've always thought the way to deal with this extremism is not just through military action and hard power. It is also a whole soft power diplomacy and engagement, that's why religious interfaith to me is a very important part of this. And so I think, you know, and for example, the reason I work now on the Middle East peace process is because I think it's of enormous importance. I can't think of anything that would give a greater push to that whole idea of mutual respect than if you can create a secure state of Israel alongside an independent, viable state of Palestine.
That's right now. The talks are going on, of course, and we'll carry on with Iraq in a moment. But while you're on the subject of that, I mean, is it realistic to think there can be a lasting solution that embraces Israel and the West Bank and ignores Gaza?
No. No, there's no solution to this that puts Gaza to one side, and I've said that throughout. The reason I wanted policy change towards Gaza was because I think it is essential that we give people in Gaza some hope for the future, that we show them that whatever disagreements we have with the de facto government there, which is Hamas, nonetheless we're going to do our best to help the people.
And you've always said my philosophy is talk to everybody. So we've got to talk to Hamas, or else we've got a lopsided picture, haven't we?
Look, people do talk to Hamas, and I think one of the things that's sometimes misunderstood is that, you know, the Egyptians are in dialogue with Hamas. Many people talk to them. Now, it's true the quartet that I represent, you know, has laid down certain conditions before we talk. But, you know, let's be clear, it's not a failure of communication here with Hamas. Now, I think there will come a point at which Hamas have got a choice to make, because frankly, it would be easier if they're in this process rather than outside it.
Much more, wouldn't it?
But the question is, are they prepared to give up violence? I mean, when they kill, you know, people may have their views about settlers and settlements, but they go and kill, you know, a pregnant woman and a mother of 6 children, and then say, you know, this is an act of heroism. It's kind of difficult to see how you sit down with such people and talk peace. You know, that's not. So they've got a decision to make as to whether they're prepared to be part of a process which, from my conversation with President Obama last week, he is absolutely determined to push this forward. It was very, very clear at the dinner we had at the White House. But they've got to decide, are they going to be part of this, or are they going to try and undermine it? And, you know, when you launch talks that we're all hoping lead somewhere, I mean, people can be as cynical as they like, but we're hoping get somewhere, and then they deliberately go and kill, you know, innocent people in order to wreck it. I mean, it's not a great indicator of their attitude, frankly.
And at the same time, however, in the field of international terrorism and so on, you said in the book something to the effect that international terrorism does not derive from something we have done. We have done. And wait a minute, various people have said and so on. And in fact, Eliza Manningham-Buller, the former head of MI5, during your, I was going to say reign, but that's perhaps the wrong word, she said this: our involvement in Iraq radicalized a whole generation of young people, some British citizens, a generation who saw our involvement in Iraq, on top of our involvement in Afghanistan, as having an attack, being an attack on Islam. You don't agree with that?
I agree that if you stand up to these terrorists and extremists, then they will fight back. But you can't have your policy determined by them. And where I think we've got to be very careful in this argument is that the change in foreign policy happened after 9/11. Right? 9/11 was not something provoked by the West. It was an unprovoked attack which killed 3,000 people in New York on one day. And if they could have killed 30,000 or 300,000, they would have. So I think, you know, I understand what she's saying, but I think you're going to be very, very careful of this argument, because when you analyze it, what are we actually saying here? We're saying if we stand up to these folk and they come back at us, then we are somehow provoking them. Well, no, I think that is not a correct analysis of the situation. I mean, the truth of the matter is these people have no justification for what they're doing, none whatever. You know, the truth is, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, there is a United Nations process for those countries to have democratic elections to decide their government. They should be allowed to do it without terrorism.
And of course, I mean, Israel has intruded in a big way in Gaza, but what you're saying is other places have been free to have elections.
Yes, and the fact is also, even in respect of Gaza, I mean, if we manage to get a peace process going where everyone forswears the use of violence, you know, we've got a chance of helping people in Gaza far more than the present situation, which is still very much a standoff.
And one of the things you mentioned in the book and everything else is the question of Iran, and Iran, which obviously is a much stronger military option or attack option than, for instance, Iraq and so on. So, and when you've said very definitely that there may need to be military action against Iran, that means that divides between, I suppose, on the one hand, bombing and the other, invasion.
Well, I don't want to get into what a military option means, or even to have it suggested that I'm sort of urging it, because I'm not. I mean, I hope very much we can resolve this issue through sanctions, through diplomacy and so on. I simply express the view that in my judgment, it is not sensible or indeed acceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons capability. I think in the hands of this regime in Iran, that is a very dangerous thing to allow.
And in terms of stopping them from that, stopping them from having nuclear weapons because it's unthinkable and so on, the options are, not picking either, but the options are bombing or invasion. Or is there anything else we could do?
Well, I mean, of course there's the diplomatic solution, and let's hope that works. If it comes to a military solution, I don't know what that solution would entail. I hope we don't get there. But I do think it is important, because I think the Iranians will make a huge miscalculation if they think otherwise. It isn't acceptable for Iran to have that nuclear weapons capability. The destabilizing effect of that on the whole of the Middle East would be enormous. And, you know, the fact is they are supporting destabilizing tendencies right round the region. I mean, that's what they're doing. And therefore, to allow that regime to have a nuclear weapons capability and the technology and the know-how that goes with it, I think is a very dangerous thing to do. And these are all difficult decisions. I mean, and that's why I say to you, you know, this whole business to do with this extremism and how we deal with it, I think the judgment will be made over quite a long period of time, because I think this is an issue that's going to be with us for a generation, not for an electoral cycle.
And the dangers haven't lessened, the dangers of it at the moment?
Dangers haven't lessened, no, because the fact is this movement is very deep, its tentacles are very deep. Look, you see it in Somalia, you see it in Pakistan. I mean, how can people put a bomb in the middle of a religious ceremony in Pakistan, right? Just kill 50 completely innocent people. I mean, this is an ideology that is poisonous and evil. And if we don't understand that we're going to have to confront it and deal with it, I mean, we're really not being very realistic about what these people do, which is try to destabilize governments by killing as many wholly innocent people as they can. And by the chaos and instability that comes with that, try to make sure that people can't take their political decisions on a rational basis. And it's a, you know, you see it in Yemen, you see it in Somalia, you see it in different places all over the world today. In the Philippines, for example, 150,000 people have died in the Mindanao dispute. I mean, it's a huge, you know, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, this is a global movement. As I say, it's a bit like revolutionary communism. It's not got a central command and control, but it's a loosely linked ideological global movement, and it's going to take some time to defeat it.
A lot of people say that we created the vacuum, the gap in Iraq, that then Al-Qaeda said, thank you very much, and filled, and hadn't filled before.
Yeah, I know, but you know, as some Iraqis say to me, why should we face a choice between terror under Saddam or terror with Al-Qaeda and various Iranian-backed organizations? Why can't we have what you have? And, you know, for me, the issue is very, very simple. These people, by terrorism, shouldn't thwart what is clearly the will of the people.
And that's basic, yes. In terms of looking ahead, one thing that has happened in the 3 years since you left office is that you made the move to join the Catholic Church, and which was no great surprise to people. Do you miss not having women priests around?
You know, look, how can I put this? When you join the church, you know, you join it. I felt the Catholic Church was the right home for me. I mean, partly, frankly, because I've been going to Mass for over 20 years. And my kids are all brought up as Catholic. My wife's a Catholic, so it felt right for me. But I've probably got enough controversies on my plate without entering into a few more. So that's the way it is.
The thing really that the Catholic Church does need to address are these enormous numbers of accusations of cover-up in the case of child abuse and paedophilia, and that's happening in, they say, in America, North and South, and Europe, and Britain, and Ireland, and of course, and there's recent reports on Ireland, and a recent statement on that from the Pope. But I mean, they really need to get their act together on paedophilia and child abuse, don't they?
Of course they've got to act on these allegations, and obviously some of this has actually happened, and it's appalling when it has happened, and the Church is absolutely right and necessary that it takes full responsibility and acts on that. All I'm trying to do is say, look, there is another side to the Church of which it can be immensely proud, and is a side to the Church that I think defines it better, frankly, than the activities of what may have been a small minority of people that are disgraceful and wrong, but don't represent what is the enormous and selfless sacrifice and commitment and compassion of many, many Catholics the world over.
As you gaze forward at this moment in time, as Nixon rephrased now, and Al Haig turned it to at this juncture of maturation, in fact, even more.
You're a better student of that than me.
Anyway, at that juncture of this juncture of maturation, what are, as you look ahead, you're fit and young, you're in fact involved in public service with the charities, you're involved in political issues and so on. What are your ambitions that you will achieve for yourself or the world in the course of the rest of your active life?
Well, I think the one linking idea is this, that my view is that globalization is an unstoppable force, that the world is, shrinking in terms of as a global community. And so what I work on is what are the things that make that community work better? Because as I say, I think the biggest single challenge is that as the world pushes people together, globalization pushes people together, does religion pull them apart again? Do these issues to do with cultural, religious ideology separate us and divide us? And so, what I work on is if I could play a part in peace between Israelis and Palestinians, that would be my most devout wish. If I can make my religious interfaith organization into something where genuinely people of different faiths can learn more about each other, because it's a fascinating discussion. If, for example, in Africa, which I'm very confident about, actually optimistic about, we can partner them in the development out of poverty and into its proper place, Africa's proper place in the international community. These are the fascinating issues that I think will dominate the world in the years to come, and I would love to play a part in it. And I get up every morning with a sense of purpose, and if you do that, you're a lucky person in my view.
So what would be your advice to anyone who said to you that they wanted to become a leader of the Labour Party? What advice would you give?
Well, be prepared for a tough time, but remember that the single most important thing for progressive politicians is if you're not in government, you can have your principles, but without power, it's very little you can do about them.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.